What are your goals, right? So is your goal just to live as inexpensively as possible? Is your goal to keep it as a rental? Like I have a client where he house hacked his condo and now we're selling his condo because he's going to upgrade to a house and then house hack the house.
Welcome to the House Hacking Success Podcast, where you'll learn the path to free rent and financial freedom through real estate. Featuring your hosts, Brad Labrie and Drew Klingler.
What's up, everybody? It's your host, Bradley Labrie, and today I want to talk about the podcast sponsor, Rentometer. Whether you already have an established rental business or analyzing your first rental deal, you know that getting the rent right is crucial to lowering investment risk and optimizing your rental income. That's why the go-to source for rent data is Rentometer. Property investors and property managers rely on Rentometer because it is the fastest and easiest way to access quality rent data for addresses and neighborhoods anywhere in the United States. You can also research current local comps, trends, and property data. Don't take our word for it. Rentometer analyzes over 500,000 rents per month and gets rave reviews from customers. My property manager, myself, and my clients all use Rentometer anytime we are looking to purchase a new property to know exactly what we can get for our properties. Go to rentometer.com today to get your 7-day free trial and save up to 60%. Grow your rental business smarter with Rentometer.
What's up, everybody? Real quick before we start the show. If you go down to the description or the show notes for this podcast episode, there's a link, and that's going to send you to a page that you can download our free ebook on. This ebook is really good. Brad wrote it, and it covers everything that you need to know about house hacking in a very structured order so you can put all the pieces together. All right, enjoy the show.
Welcome to House Hacking Success. Today we have Rick Albert from Los Angeles, California. Rick, we appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. I'm excited to get into your story today. We have a lot of listeners that are from the coast areas that are a lot more expensive, and we get a lot of questions kind of surrounding that, ways to go about it. And your story is really intriguing for many reasons. First of all, you're a broker, so you deal with a lot of volume in real estate industry. But then also you've had personal experience with ADUs, which we get a lot of questions about, and a lot of people are intrigued with. The ability to convert different areas of a house or build accessory dwelling unit on the property, things of that nature. So we're going to go into your personal story and how you see it get done. And so I'm really excited for today's show. Well, Rick, let's talk about your early beginning, coming out of college, kind of what intrigued you about real estate and what transitioned you into that industry.
It was December of 2009. I was a senior in college, and one of my good friends, he's like, hey, why don't you come down and visit? Because I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. So he's like, hey, come down and visit, meet my dad. He's really big in real estate, mortgage, all that kind of stuff. And maybe he can kind of help guide you. So I said, okay, sure. So I talked to him, and it just hit. I was like, real estate is awesome. I started doing more research, and it was just one of those things where you can exercise both sides of the brain, right? It's the creative side, whether it's trying to find a deal, trying to add value, but it's also the number side. Do the numbers make sense? How do you flip a home, whatever it might be? Originally, the plan was to go into commercial. But then when I moved down here, I started working with a developer, which ended up being my friend's dad, where we were buying homes at the courthouse steps for like residential properties. And then we started doing the fix and flips, or when you buy a foreclosure at the courthouse steps, there's sometimes people still living in the home. So you have to work on getting them out, whether that be cash for keys or going through the court system, whatever it might be. So I started doing that. And then we started selling the homes. We realized we could do it better than a lot of these other agents. So I now work with the brokerage, America Real Estate, and I've been helping clients since 2012. I did my first house hack in 2015, and then I'm currently my second house hack here, which we bought back in 2018.
Awesome. So let's kind of talk about that first house hack. There's a lot of mystery around, financing of California real estate and stuff. We'll get a lot of questions about that. Talk us through that deal and kind of the financing you chose to go with and the deal itself.
So didn't have a lot of money. And so I'd saved up enough to do like 10% down on a condo. So I started looking at different condos. I was with my girlfriend, now wife at the time, and she wasn't living with me, but I wanted to get her input. And we started seeing these like done condos, and I used done with quotations because I was like, they weren't done very well.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to lie, because I worked with a developer, I'd see what they were doing. I'm like, I want that.
Yeah.
Not that I could afford it, but I want it.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, fine, I'm going to look for the cheapest 2-bath condo that I could find like near my office. My office was located in Sherman Oaks, which for those that aren't familiar with LA, it's in the northern part, San Fernando Valley portion. And I found the condo. It was listed for $245. And what I liked about it is it was in a neighborhood called Tarzana, but it was just north of the freeway, which for some people, they don't realize that is Tarzana. They think it's a different neighborhood, which is at a lower price point. So I get the lower price with a better address. Saw it. She was a heavy smoker. She had lived there for over 30 years, and it just sat. It was sitting on the market. And so I said, I can take care of this smoke. I can take care of this kitchen. I can take care of this stuff. So I ended up locking it in for $225. At 10% down, I put about $18,000 into it. I ended up refinancing. Oh, I didn't have a lot of money. So to help with that, I actually increased my interest rate on my loan. And in exchange, the lender gave me money. And I did that because I knew I was going to refinance after I fixed it up.
And so talk about that with the lender. How were they able to give you money with the higher interest rate?
So what's most common is people pay points. So what most people do is they'll pay to lower their interest rate. I did the opposite. So I talked to my loan officer, said, I want you to jack up my interest rate as high as possible, which at the time, I think I locked in, it was like 4.25%, which was super high back then.
Right.
But in exchange, they gave me a few $1,000s to help cover some of my closing costs. That's what we ended up doing. Fixed it up. Then a few months later, I refinanced, which got rid of the private mortgage insurance because I had added so much value. Then literally a few months after that, Brexit happened and interest rates dropped. So I refinanced again. So I refinanced twice in 6 months. And I had gotten a roommate from the get-go, and I was paying like $700 a month to live in LA.
No, for sure. And I think a lot of things, pretty much everyone we have on this show, they find a way that everyone else runs from. Like for you, you saw the ability, this lady had lived there for 30 years. She had smoked in it. And almost all the people that wanted to make this just their primary residence didn't want to go through the hassle of dealing with that smoke, everything that's required, the painting, probably you had to go through all the flooring as well, and just kind of go through the entire house. That's a big undertaking. But for someone like yourself who is looking to dramatically reduce your cost of living, and also add a lot of equity, which you were able to do by, and which caused your ability to refinance and all of that. We see that all the time where you take on properties that everyone else runs from.
And what I like about condos, because you bring up a good point, condos are not that difficult to remodel, right? You're not dealing with a sewer line, you're not dealing with a roof, you're not dealing with major electrical. It's mostly the fun stuff, the picking the floors, the kitchens. It's much easier. It's a lower barrier to entry. A lot of my house hacking clients start off with condos.
Absolutely. Got a little bit of a niche now with doctors, because they have 0% down loans.
Right.
And I'm just closing on one this coming week with a doctor who's buying a condo. He is finishing the basement to live downstairs and renting the rest of the rooms out to his other doctor friends who are in residency. And so
Nice.
Condos are a great, there are a lot of people that use condos, rent by the bedroom. Like you said, you don't got to deal with a lot of the big ticket items.
Sure.
And you can just rehab the condo or whatever that is, and renting by the bedroom in a nice condo, you can either live for free or a lot of times make money.
Yeah, I mean, in LA, to set the expectation is most people aren't going to be living for free in LA.
Right.
But the goal is to lower your expenses. That's the ultimate goal. And then later on, if you want to keep it as a rental, you can. And you just have to work out the numbers ahead of time, which is what I ended up doing. I can make, I'm actually going to break even on my cost, but, as kind of what we talked about, it's like with LA, you should never bank on appreciation, but typically it's there. At the time, I could have rented it out for $1,600. Now I'm renting it out for $2,000. Right? I mean, it's just part of the game.
Right. And even if in the micro it isn't there, generally speaking, in LA, if you look over the horizon, 10, 20
sure.
years, I mean, you're certainly going to get it. Whether it comes in, in a 1 or 2 year span, again, you shouldn't bank on it. But if you look at the long stretch, you're going to probably get appreciation in both rents and cost of in the cost of the home.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in LA, just over the last decade, rents have gone up 65%. The LA Times reported that back in January. It's like, that's massive.
For sure. And it's likely to do something similar in the next 10 years.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, hopefully it doesn't go that fast just for the sake of the tenants. But what I'm seeing is, because in LA you have rent control, right?
Mhm.
There's statewide rent control now for California, but Los Angeles has their own.
Mhm.
And it's kind of a pain to deal with. Because of that, some mom and pop landlords are leaving the market, which leaves an opportunity for people like me and you to be like, well, I'm your only option
Right. For sure.
for a lot of these tenants. So yeah,
Sure.
I do think that rents are going to go up
For sure. For
because
sure.
of that.
So let's go into your second house hack,
Sure.
which was unique in the fact that it's an FHA 203K loan. We talk a lot about that loan on our podcast. We brought in a couple of experts. I myself have used one, big fan of it. But you also combine that with the ADU aspect of it, which we've also talked a little bit about, but we haven't gone into depth. So tell us a little about that second house hack where you not only did a 203K, but you also created an ADU, some of the pros, but then also I know there were a few cons, at least with your particular scenario.
Yeah. So at that time, my girlfriend then became fiance. Like, all right, we want to buy a house and we want to continue doing the house hacking. So I actually did a line of credit on my condo. So I effectively did it for zero down when I bought this place. We saw the house, we liked some of the numbers, we liked how it was going to be, and we were one of 17 offers. Got the offer accepted. We were able to renegotiate the price down almost 10% off our contract price, and we closed. So yes, we did the FHA 203K loan where we remodeled the house, expanded it, and then we built out the accessory dwelling unit. So we just did a standard garage conversion. And currently, my wife and I live in the ADU and we rent out the main house.
Awesome. So that's where you're recording from right now.
Yes.
Awesome.
This is my ADU kitchen.
Awesome. So before we go into kind of the ins and outs of that, talk a little about the HELOC loan that you took out. You said the line of credit. We touched a little bit on the show, but I think some people underestimate sometimes the power of having, owning property and then going into your second, because you can utilize the first to help the second. You said that you effectively bought the second for zero down because you were able to use the line of credit on your first one. So walk us through a little bit of that for those that are not familiar.
So you're allowed to, if you have equity in your home, in my case, condos really started jumping up in value about 2015 on. And so I had gained some equity. So I pulled out a line of credit. Now, typically lenders don't like you using it to buy. So I pulled that because I actually wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do. But when you pull out a line of credit, you only get charged interest on the money you use, which is great. So you could have effectively a bank account just sitting there full of money. In this case, we did decide to use it towards the next purchase. And we only paid for the money that we used. Now we ended up using the full amount, which we can go into why later, because that was not the intention.
Right.
That's the basics of the line of credit. It's a second mortgage, and it's usually at a higher interest rate.
For sure. So let's go through the 203K. Some people are familiar. A lot of people are not. First of all, what does it allow you to do? And then kind of walk us through your particular deal, sort of a step-by-step guide on from start, putting it under contract to completion.
So the basics is it's a construction loan, but it's for those that are owner occupied. So I'm going to live on the property, somewhere on the property. And you can use it for just about anything except for new construction or like building pools. If there's already a pool there, you can use the money. But the money goes towards fixing up a house, adding an ADU, just about whatever you want. So when we entered escrow, we got a contractor out there to give us a bid. We went through the scope of work. We started working with someone called a HUD consultant. And the HUD consultant, you effectively are hiring them, but he works with the bank. He's the guy that comes out, or she's the guy that comes out to make sure work is actually happening kind of along the way. So they all come out, get the bids together, get our scope of work together, and get the bank to approve it to make sure that once everything's fixed up there. So they did a value based off of, with the addition, with the ADU, what is it going to be worth when it's all done, and said, okay, yep, we'll give you the money. So we did that. We closed on the property, and that's where things got interesting. So for starters, the city had changed guidelines on building out the ADUs, so it ended up being a lot more expensive than what we thought. But that's why you have the line of credit from the condo, right? So it's almost like an emergency fund, because I had tenants living in there at that time. I had moved out. I got tenants paying. So the tenants have been paying the mortgage, been paying the HELOC, all that fun stuff. And then from there, once you know you're ready to get a check issued from the bank, they send the HUD consultant out. He says, okay, sewer work's been done, electrical's been done. That value is $20,000. Bank, go ahead and do the contractor. The problem we ran into is the lender was super slow. It took them 6 weeks to get us our first check. And I was like, that's rough.
Right.
Because my contractor's like, Rick, I can't, how do I pay my guys? So typically it's supposed to take, and I don't know what your experience was, and I'd love to hear it. It's supposed to take what, 10 to 14 days really from like the whole process for each check. And it's like, for us, like our first check was like 6 weeks. Our third check was like 3 weeks. It was like ridiculous. So for all those listening, if you're going to go down this route, and I still encourage people to do it, talk to the lenders and set the expectation of how long those checks are going to take.
So Matt Procaro, he's at the 203K way on Instagram.
Yeah, I follow him.
He's been on the show a couple times. I forget the exact website, but if you go to his page and scroll down a little bit, he'll have a video where it's called the 60-second hack. And anyways, you go on this government website, which will actually list every lender that has closed a deal, a 203K in your market. And that way you can find the lender that's actually, done a 203K, because I had a similar experience. I mean, I had a lender that they actually sent out the checks on a reasonable time, but that was about the only thing that was in a reasonable time. It took about 3 months to actually close on the property. Just a lot of challenges. But again, if you work with a great broker like yourself on the real estate side, and then you combine that with a lender that actually knows what they're doing, and can perform these things on a reasonable timeline, it takes a lot of the headache away. And Matt has a lot of great resources if somebody out there wants to do a 203K. And again, we have a lot of listeners in LA and in California. Reach out to Rick, because I'm certain that all of these experiences led to a lot of wisdom surrounding these types of loans, which I'm sure you help a lot of clients with.
For sure. So I mean, in hindsight, what I think I would have done is I would have paid more for the HUD consultant to come out more often. Probably what I would have done different, because this ended up being a very big project. I mean, we ended up spending all in probably about $215,000. Now, good news is we're in the middle of a refinance. Once the refinance is done and you factor in the rent from the main house, we're going to be paying about $574 a month.
Which is incredible for LA.
Yeah. And that still includes, we're going to be hit with private mortgage insurance because it didn't appraise quite enough. So it's like there's still opportunity in the next year or two for it to go down even more.
So kind of, going now into being a broker and stuff, I'm sure you work with a lot of house hackers, specifically in LA. Speak to the listeners out there who are in a market similar to yours, or maybe in LA. What is something that you generally go about first and foremost advising them if their goal is to follow a similar path of yours, house hacking, dramatically lowering their expense of living in a high-end market like LA?
Yeah. So first we always sit down, like, what are your goals, right? So is your goal just to live as inexpensively as possible? Is your goal to keep it as a rental? Like, I have a client where he house hacked his condo, and now we're selling his condo because he's going to upgrade to a house and then house hack the house. So it really depends. So I factor in those goals. Now, if they're like, Rick, I want to do what you did. I want to buy a fixer. And it's like, okay, great. Then we need to start defining what their budget is, right? Like, because the first thing you should do is, as you know, is you got to get pre-approved. I had clients get pre-approved for more than what they expected. I've had probably more get pre-approved for less than what they expected. So you have to go through that exercise. And then we kind of go from there. Like in today's market, if I were to start over, I would probably look for at least a three-bedroom condo, fixer condo is probably what I would do. And they're out there. And you can, put 3% down, right? If you're a first-time home buyer. So you could be buying a condo all in for like $20,000. House hack the other 2 bedrooms, fix it up, do your thing.
Because again, like we said, in 10 or 20 years, California real estate is going to continue to go up and up and up, and I'll never forget my uncle who, he unfortunately passed away, but he told me the story many times, moving out to LA and he worked for the big sports teams out there. And, back in the early 90s, when real estate was, I think he bought his place for like $280,000, and he kept saying real estate is too much, real estate is too much out in LA, but he finally pulled the trigger. And when he passed away about, 10 years ago, the place was worth almost $2 million, and just how much appreciation. And not that necessarily in a 20-year span, it'll be that dramatic, but real estate is going to continue to appreciate over time, especially in markets like that. And, if you think it's expensive now, waiting isn't necessarily the better option.
Everybody, let's take a quick minute and talk about Rent Ready. Are you new to house hacking and wondering how you find tenants and collect rent? especially while trying to maintain professional boundaries and a shared living space. RentRedi can help you manage your house hack setup. For less than $9 a month, you can do it all. Fill rooms quickly with sites like Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist with a free professionally designed listing page. Find high-quality tenants with TransUnion certified background checks, electronically send, signed, and store leases, and collect rent for the entire lease or set up month-to-month charges. For your tenants, they use RentRedi's app to complete the application, sign their lease, and pay you rent. They can even submit maintenance requests from the app instead of knocking on your door. Even better, RentRedi is unlimited, so you don't have to pay per unit or per tenant. Just one flat price, which puts more money in your pocket. And speaking of putting more money in your pocket, RentRedi has given our listeners a discount to get 50% off any RentRedi plan when you sign up using our special code SUCCESS at rentredi.com. That's RENTREDI.com using code SUCCESS for 50% off any RentRedi plan. All right, let's get back to the episode.
My condo is probably worth about $360 now. The other thing to factor in, especially like Los Angeles, is yes, Los Angeles is an expensive market, but we're still cheaper than like San Francisco, New York. If you go overseas, we're probably cheaper than London, Tokyo. People are actually moving here with money. Back when we could do open houses, it seemed like 90% of my open houses, I mean, at least one person moving here from New York, because it's cheaper. You get a house. We still have the major airports, so if they need to travel, they can do it. And we are, we've over the last, we'll call it 20 years, have been able to develop the hipper restaurants, the cool hikes, like all this stuff that we just didn't have before. And we have better weather.
Yeah. So ADUs in California and coastal areas have become very popular, and I think they're probably long term going to become even more popular as we try to reach demand of affordable housing. You talked a little bit about rent control, so it looks to me, and of course you would know a lot more than I would, but these larger apartment buildings, don't have the kind of growth that maybe the ADU model and smaller, 2 to 4 units or whatever that looks like will have because of rent caps. Talk a little bit about, you talked about, LA changing some of the rules around ADUs when you were going about. Talk to the people that are considering it, what they should think about if they are wanting to do an ADU, what some of those rules are, and how you see clients or other people utilizing the ADU model.
So for starters, when I look at ADU properties, because I have a lot of clients that either have built ADUs, bought ADUs, a developer I work with has actually flipped 3 homes with ADUs. I always look at privacy, right? Because the idea behind the ADU is it can you're creating a second unit, but you don't want it to necessarily feel like a duplex or an apartment complex. You want it. So it's like, okay, how can we add privacy? Like in my case, and I know for those that are listening won't be able to see, but where our kitchen and bathroom is, that's actually facing our tenant's yard. So there's no windows facing the yard. So they can't see me, I can't see them. We've fenced it off. We have a backyard. So how can you create outdoor experiences? Effectively, what we're doing is creating a mini house, right? Washer dryer is huge. You're already running plumbing there, so you might as well do it. So I looked at those things, look at utilities. So for example, in our case, we made our whole unit all electric. So we split the electric meters, but I didn't have to worry about splitting gas. Things like where are the power lines? Because if you have power lines running over the garage, you're not allowed to have that. So you have to figure out, okay, how can I reroute it if I even can? And of course, you look at the rents. What are ADUs renting for? And if you're near apartments, that is an alternative. So you can look at the apartment complex and see what they're getting as well. I had a client of mine, he owns a house with a 2-bedroom ADU. He house hacked his first place and I was his tenant. Then I helped him buy a place, build out an ADU. So he's a repeat client. But in this case, we priced it what we thought was fair for the ADU, then realized that an apartment complex nearby was similar, 2-bed, 2-bath with washer dryer, and it was going for less. So for a lot of the tenants at this price point, they will compare the two.
For sure.
Because they're like, well, because they're more price sensitive. Because like you said, this is affordable housing, and that's where this is going. And then in terms of a house with an ADU versus a duplex, the big advantage is houses with ADUs are generally in nicer neighborhoods. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I
Right.
mean it like you're in a residential neighborhood, right? So, nice streets, great neighbors, all that. Oftentimes with multifamily, you're surrounded by other multifamily, which just isn't for everyone,
Mm-hmm. For sure.
right? The parking tends to be a little bit harder, that sort of deal. So you can be in prime neighborhoods and be able to have 2 units.
So you talked about electrical lines going over the garage, things of
Sure.
that nature. What are some of the other restrictions that LA, for instance, have with ADUs?
So that's the big one. The other one is parking. So if you're within a half-mile radius of public transportation, all you need is 2 off-street parking spots. So if you have a long driveway, you're fine, whatever. If you're, let's say, up in the hills, which most of your listeners may not be, but for the sake of conversation, if you are, then it's a whole nother ballgame because you need to find parking somewhere for your tenants.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
those are some of the big ones, but for the most part, it's not that difficult to
Mm-hmm.
get it permitted. You get the plans drawn up. The city has to turn it around in less than 60 days to get the permit approved. I hired a permit worth every penny. She got it approved in 2 weeks. So you spend a few $100, you just get it done because time is money.
For sure. So going back a little bit in your story, you talked about starting off with REOs, which for people that are unfamiliar, it's real estate owned. Generally speaking, it's bank repossession. You talked about kind of have familiarity with kind of the 200,000 range with the condo you talked about all the way up to 9.6 million, I believe. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing now. I mean, the market's a lot different than when you started, but do you still see REOs? Are there opportunities out there for investors sort of in LA, greater LA market? And, are those still out there?
Yeah. So in terms of, there aren't that many foreclosures, right? Because especially right now, because of COVID, people can just go into forbearance and they can just push out their payments. Now, the majority, and then they say, 90% of Americans have at least 10% equity in their homes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a homeowner that's financially distressed, you're better off just doing a traditional sale than
Mm-hmm.
going through the foreclosure process. Why have that on your record?
Right.
You could sell it, get your cash and start over.
Mm-hmm.
I represented a client recently where that was the story. He bought from the sellers, and sellers had lost their jobs and they were in forbearance and all that. So I don't necessarily see foreclosure. We'll probably see some. I just don't think we're going to see the massive wave
Mm-hmm.
that people are expecting. Now, in terms of, are there going to be opportunities for investors? I think so, right? I mean, it's not about finding the deals, it's about making the deals. How can you make it work? Can you add another bedroom? Like when we were looking at houses for some clients, right? Okay, what if we considered a 2-bedroom where you can add a third, or doing the FHA 203K loan and adding an ADU, and you can always refinance later on if it makes sense. So it's about getting creative. One of the tips I like to do, and what I've been doing, is you find a really desirable area in LA, let's say, for example, and you live just outside of it. Because as everyone gets priced out of that one neighborhood, they have to go somewhere. And that's where you come in.
Yeah.
And that's where we're seeing a lot of the growth.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, value add is, again, we touched on it a little bit earlier, people looking for gold. I mean, finding things just beyond what the general clientele of an area, there's a threshold, right? To where certain level of uncomfortability that they don't want to exceed. Like, for instance, going from a 2 to 3 bedroom. I mean, that is a very big step for the traditional consumer of real estate, or smoke, or, mold. There's a saying in my area that mold is gold. That I know a lot of clients that I work with that actually target mold because, relatively speaking, it is not, you have to have an expertise in it, but the cost of it isn't what traditional consumers think it might be. And so finding niches that other people don't want to do within that path of growth is almost always the best way forward of building equity. And I love that, what you talked about with value add.
Yeah. And what I love about LA is we have a lot of resources. I mean, like a lot, right? There's this whole part of LA where you can go direct for your kitchen cabinets. Like when I did my condo, I didn't know that. And so I went to like Lowe's or like the Home Depots of the world and bought my cabinets. I think I paid like $2,200 just for the cabinets. These cabinets that are in my ADU plus install, I got done for $2,000, right? Like in LA, there's so many different resources to find inexpensive. I mean, materials are already expensive as it is, but you don't have to go to those traditional big box retailers.
I love that. And we touch on it a lot on this show, but I'm glad we've had you on for our listeners in your area, because if if someone out there is listening and you find somebody like Rick, who is a rock star in your area, you've gone through the process of doing this twice now and you've helped several clients and all of that. I mean, you understand these resources beyond the scope of someone's comprehension. For people unfamiliar with my story, I mean, my first deal, I lost thousands of dollars because I didn't have, someone in my corner that understood certain things.
Sure.
And so finding those little small things, like you said, you spent more just for the cabinets than what you did with installation because of all the resources out there in LA.
Yeah. And look, I've made plenty of mistakes. I mean, with this house, to be honest, originally the plan was to move into the main house, and then, it just cost more than expected. It was a 4-month project that took a year because the city kept doing all these delays after delays. And it's just like, I was just so mad. I'm like, I work in real estate. Why is this happening to me? Like, I should know.
Yeah.
But it's like, we just looked like, hey, this stuff was out of my control. And then I was talking to my wife and she's like, look, we learned a lot and now you get to share that with your clients, right? I was like, thank God, because like if this happened to one of my clients, I'd feel so guilty.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, that's just what it is. People that, kind of do something for the first time. I mean, there's so many lessons to be learned. And that's where the wisdom of your experiences, now you get to relay that to your clients coming behind you. Look, this is what I've found. I mean, from my experience working with, the lender that I used was a good person.
Sure.
He understood the world of financing, but little did I know, he had no experience with a 203K loan. And that is relatively common because not everyone in the lending industry have done one.
Right.
And so that's why, that government site, and I wish I knew it offhand, points people to, you could actually find the lenders that are doing those loans. And there's, they understand the process, they understand the hiccup. And same with an agent. If you find somebody that has house hacked, that has done a 203K or has added a third bedroom when you're trying to find a 2-bedroom, little things like that. There's so much wisdom involved with people that have been through the process before you.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there's so many great resources out there now.
Absolutely. And I'm sure in California, there are certain sections for people that qualify for down payment assistance and things like that. Not everyone can or qualify, but there's just a lot of resources now out there for, home ownership. And that's why house hacking, when you combine your primary resident with attempting to better yourself with equity and lowering your housing costs, there's a lot of resources out there for you.
Yeah, and it also allows you to be more competitive in the marketplace, right? It's like, okay, not that you should go above your budget, but it allows you to have that flexibility, knowing like we ended up capping out our loan amount. Like I had joked with my wife, I was like, we're not going to do this, but then we started realizing, well, we might have to. So we start factoring in all this extra income we're going to get, and it allows us to be more competitive.
For sure.
With the FHA 203K loan, some people's concern with that loan is like, oh, you're going to get, because it's so complicated, it's going to be harder in multiple offer situations, right? Because there's other buyers out there where it's not as complicated. But I took the approach of, look, we're just as good as cash because we don't care about the condition of your home. When we made our offer, so like someone else who's doing traditional financing, if the place is in really bad shape, the loan won't go through. My case, the loan will go through.
So you talked a little bit about, we've talked a couple about your mistake as an investor and things. What are some other some lessons that you've gone through that now in retrospect, you have a little bit more wisdom about the process of being an investor or being an agent or being in real estate in general?
Good question. So we'll take this house. One of the mistakes I made is I didn't follow my gut. We were referred someone to do some work on the place and I was like, I don't know. Something doesn't feel right. I've asked for certain things. He hasn't delivered. And everyone's like, no, give him a shot. Well, I should have followed my gut because he was doing a horrible job. I said, hey, I can only pay you when the lender cuts the checks. And then all of a sudden he's like, oh, I need to get paid weekly. I'm like, no, dude, we set a certain expectation. So had I followed my gut and my instinct and said, look, I knew there was something off. If I'd done that from the get-go, we probably would have saved a ton of time and a ton of money. So really kind of just listening to yourself, taking a step back. Sometimes this process can really get you moving, like in terms of like your mind's moving a million miles, a second. And so it's just like, no, take a step back, breathe. Does this make sense? Then respond. So that was the big one with this project, and then we had hired someone to be kind of like our project manager for the project, even though, again, I knew I could do it, but I was just like, no, I'm working. I got other stuff to do.
Yeah.
But then when I started realizing, oh, she's not doing that great of a job. So I stepped in and said, nope, this is what we're going to do. Create a plan, right? For all your listeners, especially if they're looking to buy a fixer, create that plan up front.
What does that look like? Let's go into that, because I'm certain, even if somebody knows they want to do a fixer, maybe they even have one under the belt, it's sometimes difficult to predict the future. When you're talking about, especially for somebody new, trying to create a plan around the unknown. What should, regardless of what the scope of work looks like, what does a plan look like from your perspective?
For starters, I create a list of all the work we want done. It's an Excel sheet, right? Keep it simple. So you have a list of all the work that needs to be done, who's the responsible party, right? So it's like, okay, painter, contractor, flooring guy, whatever. Then you kind of create a timeline. Okay, what order does this happen? Okay, the foundation has to happen first, obviously, or demo has to happen first. What else needs to be triggered? So it's almost like a sub checklist. Okay, I need to get the garbage dumpster here, and I got to get that done and paid for. Because there's always going to be surprises, one way or another. Now, we were fortunate on this project. Construction-wise, there really was no surprises. We did a pretty good job with inspections ahead of time, so it wasn't an issue. Our surprises was the delays from the city and from the lender and all that. But yeah, so I do that, and then from there, I actually do start looking at finishes. Because what a lot of people don't realize is the contractor or the plumber's going to need to know, what is your shower head look like? What does your faucet look like? Oh, but I'm not ready yet because, that's going to be months down the road. It's like, well, no, because they need to know where to put the plumbing for that to happen. So what we've done in the past, what I encourage other people to do is, let's say, create your shopping list, like in Amazon or, Wayfair or whatever, and just keep it safe. So you already know which one you're buying, and then place the order when you're ready.
And a good thing is, especially when you're talking about a 203K or a similar construction loan, because, VA has one, conventional has a renovation loan. There are several renovation loans out there, but the HUD consultant that you spoke of and the contractor, they are also there for people that aren't. I liken the 203K loan to almost like training wheels for flipping a property, because the bank obviously does not want to lose money. That's job number one of the bank. And so they put these people in place for you to make sure that you don't get screwed. Like you said, there are draws from the bank set in a specific order to make sure that the contract doesn't take advantage of not only the bank, but also you, the consumer. So there are several protections in place to make sure that this project goes along as smooth as possible to protect you. And so the consultant and the contractor are also there to help provide that scope of work and the timeline for you, to where, that might be a daunting task for someone who's never kind of considered the fact that they got to actually pick out what kind of shower head they need before work starts because of plumbing, like you said. But the contractor and the consultant are going to be there and say, listen, this is the order. We need it. You need to start figuring out this stuff out. So yeah, being as prepared as possible is obviously recommended, but there are also people involved to help you along in that process.
And the two things to add to that is, we started doing like weekly calls with our contractor. Okay, this week, what is going to get done? And then the other thing, especially if you're new at remodels, that you really need to know is that if your contractor needs a decision, you need to make that decision. It's not a wait a week to make that decision. It's like, you need to talk to your contractor. What decisions do you need this week? Hey, Rick, I need, what do you need? Where's it go? Oh, yes, the kitchen knobs. Hey, I need these. Great, done. He got them within 48 hours, right? Everything was a quick decision. The only decision we lagged on was we had these giant French doors. They're gorgeous as part of the addition. And we were trying to figure out which one to do. We had to make sure it met certain compliance issues. So that took longer, which then they ended up being on back order. And we couldn't touch our house for 10 weeks. Like, our house was empty for 10 weeks. That's the cost of not making a decision quickly. So those are the two things when we're working with a contractor, is turnaround time and having those weekly calls. Super important.
So Rick, we like to ask a question to every guest, which is, and LA is obviously kind of even a step beyond kind of what the traditional, if you're not in LA and New York and some of these really hot markets, we would like to say, like, we get a lot of people reaching out to us that want a house hack, but it seems like it's almost like the 80-20 rule applies to this as well, to where, it feels like maybe only 20% of the people that set out the house hack actually execute and house hack. What is it that maybe separates those that actually do it and pull the trigger from those that don't?
Very good question. The difference is self-actualization. What do I mean by that? So people often say, I don't have enough money because my boss doesn't pay me enough. Okay, well, now that you've realized that, you now have the power to do something about it. Ask for that raise, get another job, get a side hustle. So once you start realizing your obstacles, now you're personally responsible for them and you have the opportunity to act on it, right? So when we bought this house and I started realizing, okay, this guy's not doing his job properly. Okay, well, now I can no longer blame him. I now have to blame myself because I'm not doing anything about it, right? So we fired him, brought someone else in, started taking more control. So that's really the difference, is really taking that self-responsibility and that self-realization that I have to make a change. I can't start blaming other people. That's not going to solve anything. In hindsight, during the 10 weeks that we couldn't touch our house, I should have reached out to film scouts to see if anyone wanted to film my house for a construction scene. I could have made some extra cash. People pay like $1,000 a day, right? And that's just in hindsight. But yeah, I think that's a lot of it has to do with just you personally have to take those action steps. When I bought my first condo, I did not have a lot of money. I got my food budget down to like $30 a week. And that's here in LA. I had friends who were like, hey, you want to go to the movies or do this? I said, hey, I set a budget. I can only go out to the movies, once a month, whatever it is. You have to start, self-discipline.
I love that because, there really are so many different things we could do, not only in real estate, but just in general. We get people asking us all the time, and I do just in general, like things like Tesla and Bitcoin, there's just all these shiny objects, and there always will be. And, if somebody, obviously you and I are huge proponents of house hacking, just what it can do long term. And there's nothing wrong with buying Tesla, nothing wrong with buying Bitcoin and all these things. But what I see happen a lot of times is similar, what you said is that people don't get narrow-minded and really understand what they really truly want. And it's going to come at a cost. There's going to be a lot of delayed gratification. You're going to have to do, like what you said, get yourself on a budget, especially, to save up that down payment money. And it's going to take being narrow-minded for a period to realize that particular goal, which then from there, the amount of money that you've saved over time allows you to do whatever else it is. But a lot of times, people don't take that time to realize what they really need and want, and then execute on that on an executable game plan for whatever it is they want to do.
Yeah. And look, people's tastes change, right? It's this whole idea like, oh, I want to buy my dream home. It's like, well, when I was single, my dream home was a New York style loft condo. Mm-hmm. But when we do have kids, that's not going to be my dream home. Mm-hmm. It's going to be far from it. I'm going to want a yard. I'm going to want space. We live in our ADU right now. This is definitely not our dream home. It's about 350 square feet.
Right.
Right. So it's like my wife and I both work 5 feet from each other. Like, that's not our dream home. But like you said, it's delayed gratification. It's like when we move out, this house is going to cash flow about $1,000 to $1,200 a month on our hard costs. Mm-hmm. So it's like, how many doors are you going to need in the Midwest to cash flow $1,000? 10 doors? And I don't have to deal with 2 tenants. That's a hell of a lot better than dealing with so many. And there's nothing wrong with investing in the Midwest. Don't get me wrong. Right. But yeah, I think you're right. It's a lot of delayed gratification. It's understanding you're going to make mistakes along the way, and that's okay. There was a real estate podcast I was listening to, and he brought up a good point. It's like, real estate's very forgiving. You can make mistakes now, but over time, it can pay you back.
Exactly. Yeah, no, for sure. And, I tell, and Brandon Turner from Bigger Pockets brings up this point a lot.
Yeah, he's the one who brought it up. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And I not necessarily that in particular, but he talks about your first deal, just like, mine, it was a complete bomb, my first deal. But if you give yourself time and if you literally just get an average deal to where you get a good inspector, it's got a good foundation, there's nothing major with it, real estate is very forgiving. And that over time, the confidence that you gain from that first deal will return such a higher level of ROI than if you hit a home run on the first deal. Because, a lot of people sit and wait for home runs, and home runs are very few and far between. I mean, you can hit, you can do a very, find a very good deal. But if you're looking for that, absolute home run grand slam, a lot of times it leads to analysis paralysis where life changes and you never end up executing on it. And so, finding a deal to where it's a good deal. It's solid fundamentally, and you can dramatically reduce your cost of living. The confidence involved with that, I see it all the time with clients and myself and friends and people that do it. Just the return on confidence from that first deal, if you get an average deal, is beyond anything you could ever learn from podcasts and books. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And look, if you're waiting for that home run deal, the problem is so is everybody else.
And
right.
the people that are have cash,
Right.
yeah.
Right. I mean, look, people always say the number one rule in real estate is location, location, location. I say that is the number two rule. The number one rule in real estate is that the market waits for no one. I've had clients who are like, oh, I think I'm going to wait. Why? I have a friend of mine, and I always make fun of him for this because we had talked about him buying like 5-6 years ago.
Mhm.
And I was like, why don't you just buy like a little condo? You'll be fine. All that. No, I don't want that lifestyle. Fast forward to today, he's priced out of what he wanted. And worse yet, he's still living in the same apartment. Had he bought a condo, he would have had the same lifestyle, only literally it probably would have made like 100K because I actually showed him like the data. It's like, dude, if you had bought 5 years ago and you banked on that appreciation, you did this, it's like I would have made you $100,000 and you turned that down. He's like, yeah, I know I screwed up. I'm like, yes, but that's okay. We learn from that, and then we go looking for things. So yeah, look for those base hits. Sure.
There's the first deal brings so much more than just the gains, the monetary gains from it. If someone's out there like you and I, and potentially wants to build out a portfolio or whatever it is, I mean, the I hear it all the time too, that I want to wait for, a downturn, and that's fine. That's logical in some ways, but the problem is that, building a reputation, like in times of, market downturn, that means that credit squeezes, that means that less, that it's much more difficult to get financing. And it's even dramatically more difficult to find like private money and hard money and things like that, which is readily available during a good market. And so building that confidence, and then also, building out the credibility needed to be able to bring on private money and things like that, to be able to build a portfolio during the downturns, comes from you being able to do it during, times where it's easier to get in. And so I tell people all the time, in the short term, if you find a place like, where we live, you can find, duplex and triplexes where you can come pretty close to living for free. And out in LA, you might be, paying $300 to $700, kind of like your scenarios, a month, but those are still dramatically less, where you gain that confidence. You also build that reputation, and combining those two during downturns where credit squeezes, you have the ability to go to other investors and say, listen, I have a little bit of a track record, invest in me. And you build those relationships. And that's part of the puzzle that some people forget about when they talk about, oh, I want to buy during a downturn, and their goal is to build a portfolio. It's like, yeah, but credit challenges that you're going to face during those downturns, you have to be able to build out, the confidence needed to sustain that, because there are going to be a lot of pressures telling you that the sky's falling when things do change.
And you bring up a really interesting point. So people do want to wait for the downturn. The issue is one that's really hard to predict. And my hunch for some of those people is, even if there was a downturn, they're going to come up with another excuse not to buy.
Absolutely.
All right. If you're not, because like, okay, you buy today. Let's say the market drops today. Okay, it's a paper loss. Doesn't mean you have to sell. Just keep doing what you're doing. That's all you have to do. Keep making your payments. Exactly. It's like, I sold a house once. She, her and her husband, they bought it back in like the 90s for like $500,000. I ended up selling it as a teardown for almost 1.5. It's like it almost tripled in value. And it's like, well, they went through a couple of downturns. I think they did okay. I think they survived.
Sure.
But yeah, most of the people that I'm talking to, when they're like, I'd rather wait for a downturn, it's like, you and I both know you can't predict it. Almost nobody predicted it the last round. And you're just coming up with an excuse not to buy.
And as you said earlier, and you and I being agents and you being a broker and being heavily involved. I mean, this one, no matter what it is, first of all, no one's going to be, no one's going to predict it because there's so many variables. And second of all, it's going to be completely different than the last time. Because like you said, people have equity. And so the dramatic loss in paper, like you said, from the market being undercut, probably, almost certainly is not going to be as severe. It's probably going to be another exterior factor, which is even more challenging to predict, and how it's going to affect. I mean, I'm sure, Rick, you and I had similar experiences where back in March and April, when things were really heating up. I mean, I remember getting on Zoom calls with a lot of the leaders, not only in my market, but throughout the country. And it was really challenging to predict what was going to happen on the other side of this, because conventional wisdom said people being out of jobs probably means that we're going to see a dramatic decrease in, people wanting to buy new homes. Well, it's the exact opposite, because people were cooped up and there was so much going on all around that people wanted a distraction. They wanted out of their current situation. And so, it dramatically rose in the amount of people wanting to buy new homes. And it also lowered the amount of people that were selling because they didn't want people coming through their house with the virus. And so it was impossible to predict that perfect storm to where this summer has been unlike anything else. And I know it's similar in LA, as far as the competitiveness of the market. And so it's almost impossible to predict it. Gaining that confidence of the first deal is beyond anything you can possibly replicate with books and podcasts. I'm a huge advocate of finding a good deal that is just a solid deal, and then going from there. Whether you pull money out in the HELOC, there's just so many options. Getting involved is the first step.
And don't be scared to pay over list price. With that said, like if the numbers work, the numbers work. I've worked with people like it could have been listed for $1 and they would have offered 97 cents. I'm like, well, guess what? Now you're not getting it.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Right.
I was fortunate. I got below list on my condo. This house, we were still $21,000 above the list price, and we still made it work.
And now it's been a great ROI for you.
Yeah, once the refinance is done, it's going to be a good one. We're excited, and then we're looking to have tenants in my condo. If they decide to move out, we'll probably sell it because if you lived in it 2 of the last 5 years, the money's still tax free. Then we'll use that money to fund the next ADU project.
Absolutely. So Rick, let's talk about a lifestyle or kind of a business podcast or book that has, whether it's something you're listening to now or reading now or just over your time. Like what book or podcast do you recommend for kind of business or lifestyle or just mindset in general?
Yeah. So I do listen to Bigger Pockets. That's probably one that you probably heard of. It's the big one. I do like that one because it does talk about a lot of things real estate related. And they also tell you to, like, if someone brings up something, they'll say, stop, explain it. I think that's super important. So that's really kind of the big one. I actually do listen to Freakonomics radio, and that one's not so much of like business related, but it's more of just critical thinking. So for those that aren't familiar, Freakonomics was a book that came out by 2 economists, and they compared all sorts of random things. And they actually found correlations between them. But now they'll do interviews like, why is Trader Joe's the most profitable per square foot grocery store? Or they'll interview like about COVID and the respirators and why some states are doing better than others and things like that. And so I really like the critical thinking aspect because it reminds me in my life, I have to be a critical thinker.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. And the reason why we ask that question is because house hacking, generally speaking, is so much beyond just real estate. What makes up why somebody would choose to change a lifestyle from the prototypical American way. And so we like to ask that because there are so many correlations just between what it actually takes, and there's kind of a movement of being able to be, not only are we now working remotely, but before this and probably beyond this, there's a lot of a push to kind of be able to get out and experience the world to where, generations before us were so tied to their job. Now we have the ability to get out and move and sort of, experience different things, and house hacking dramatically is attached to that.
Oh, for sure. I think we're seeing a cultural shift of we work to live versus live to work.
Yeah.
Right. That's how a lot of other countries are. My wife and I love to travel, and unfortunately we couldn't do that much this year.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the United States, we tend to do that. I used to work a ton of long hours. I still work a lot, but I'm trying to cut back. It's like, no, my life does not revolve around this. My life revolves around my family, my friends. And to your point, like house hacking allows me to do that. Even if I live into a main house and I have a back unit, if you do the privacy right, if you do the fencing right, it's like, okay, it's a neighbor. It's a neighbor that pays you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't have a garage. Well, Southern California, the weather's not that bad. And I can spend $500 and go build my own little shed.
Yeah.
For my storage stuff. Like I'll live.
For sure. So what about you talked a little bit about Bigger Pockets, but a real estate book or podcast that sort of helped you maybe in house hacking or just real estate in general?
I really like Millionaire Real Estate Investor by Gary Keller. I read that back in like 2010. So before my broker, like the broker on record, before he was willing to mentor me and have me work for him, he made me do a bunch of different things. One of which was like, get your license, read these books. And it's like, I just read them quick. So that book really helped. Richest Man in Babylon, amazing book. And for those who aren't familiar with that, you can read that in a day. It's like, I don't know, 100 pages. I don't know if you've had a chance to read it.
I have, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like, it's basic stuff. And honestly, if I had just reread that book before I did the remodel in this house, I would have saved a bunch of money. So those 2 books are really good to get started.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we talk about that a lot. Like if you want to find people ask us all the time about mentors and mentorship and all this sort of things. And it's sort of become a buzzword.
Sure.
But at least from my experience, I have never went and asked somebody to be a mentor, but if you find somebody that is actually worthwhile to be a mentor, they're probably not just going to say yes. And for instance, you talked about your mentor, making you or advising you to read several books and do several things before you prove to him that you were serious. And it's very similar. I mean, if you're going to find somebody worth your while, you're going to either have to do something that helps them or to get in their osmosis, or go through some sort of steps to be involved in whatever it is, whether it's a real estate brokerage or whatever. I mean, you're going to have to be able to add some value to have someone really impact your life like that.
I totally agree. There's only so many hours in the day. So if these people are going to mentor you, they want to make sure they get their return.
Absolutely.
Well, and that could be just personal gratification, right? It doesn't necessarily mean they want money or whatever, but they want to know that they're making an impact. I would hate to be mentoring someone, them not doing anything I asked them to do or not doing anything they're supposed to be doing, and then they still keep coming back. It's like, I'd rather help someone who's willing to help themselves.
For sure. So Rick, we genuinely appreciate you coming on. We have a lot of people, like I said, from California, from LA. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, sure. So you can find me on my personal website, rickalbertonline.com. Feel free to reach out to me through Instagram at Rick B as in boy Albert. So Rick B Albert. I'm also on LinkedIn, Facebook, the same handle there. So those are probably the best ways to find me. And I'm pretty quick to respond.
For sure. And
I say that now. We'll see what happens after this airs.
And like we said, I mean, we say it on the show all the time. Rockstars hang with rockstars. And as you said earlier, a lot of the resources with your cabinets and so many things that go into just real estate in general and being a house hacker and stuff. There's more than you could, than a new beginner could comprehend involved with things of that nature. And so finding somebody like Rick in LA will not only give you access to, a great realtor and broker and things of that nature, but I'm certain, because I experienced it personally, that the thing that probably you detest most is working with a loan officer that is below average, somebody that doesn't close or doesn't set out or doesn't put your clients first and things like that. So, Rick, I'm sure works with rockstar lenders and works with, rockstar lawyers and rockstar property managers and all the, accountants and CPA, everything that you would need to become a house hacker or a real estate investor and building a portfolio and all that. You find someone in your market like Rick, it then begins to compound beyond that. They put you in touch with this person and that person puts you in touch with this. And you just begin to form a team and a community around what you're doing. And so we really appreciate you coming on, Rick.
Of course, I appreciate the opportunity. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. So if anyone, again, is in that market, reach out to Rick. We really encourage it. I'm sure he'll be able to put you in touch with the people in his market.
Happy to help.
So Rick, again, we appreciate it. And we look forward to staying in touch and growing this community.
Perfect. I look forward to it.
All right, Rick, you have a good one.
Thanks, you too.